Welcome everyone to part 2 in the series on anxiety, Angst. So in the first session, which was pretty much a preliminary session to get into the topic and to carve out some of the themes, motifs, or let's say trajectories on which direction this series might be heading, or in which direction this series might be heading. Now, today in the first genuine true session, we hopefully will get into the primary source itself. So this will be for the beginning, as we started the text The Uncanny by Sigmund Freud, published in the year 1919. So I guess it was written a while before. And just as a small recap, we looked at the first 2 pages of this paper by Freud, and it's roughly around 30 to 40 pages, I guess. And so we looked at the first 2 pages, and what was highlighted or stressed in the introductory session is that Freud is referencing a psychologist, or he's referencing the study of a psychologist whose name is Ernst Jentsch. And so Freud is mentioning that one of the rare attempts to study or to bring into view and to raise as a research topic the subject matter or phenomenon of the uncanny. The one of the rare attempts is conducted by Ernst Jentsch. So he says here and this is now a quote from page 2 of the text The Uncanny: "I know of only one attempt in medico-psychological literature, a fertile but not exhaustive paper by Ernst Jentsch. But I must confess that I have not made a very thorough examination of the bibliography, especially the foreign literature relating to this present modest contribution of mine, for reasons which must be obvious at this time, so that my paper is presented to the reader without any claim of priority." In his study of the uncanny, Jentsch quite rightly lays stress on the obstacle presented by the fact that people vary so very greatly in their sensitivity to this quality of feeling. So, what can we say to this reference or mentioning of Ernst Jentsch by Sigmund Freud? So, the first thing to say concerning this issue or subject is, I guess, that Freud is pleased that someone from the medico-psychological field of research, as Freud puts it, is investigating into this direction and is raising the subject matter, the phenomenon of the uncanny, to a research issue or a research theme or subject. So because quite obviously it doesn't seem to be at this point in time there doesn't seem to be that much literature in this regard, or rather the topic itself is perhaps, I guess, and this is more like a suspicion I have, that it's more a subject that is prevalent in terms of literature or literature studies or cultural studies in a more broader sense, but not so much in, let's say, to use Freud's term, medico-psychological literature. And so I think Freud is pleased that someone is investigating in this direction and is paying attention to the uncanny as a subject matter and as a research issue for psychology, and that someone is thematizing it and carving out and trying to attempt to access and to find approaches to study this this topic, because right, first of all, what this means, that Ernst Jentsch is or has done such a study from a psychological scientific perspective, is that he sees that, or he finds, or at least he assumes, or he must assume, that the subject matter or phenomenon of the uncanny is like, let's say, an irreducible, or at least, or not at least, but an irreducible or important, relevant aspect or trait or subject matter, as you want to put it, for psychology, so that it has a relevance in terms of the study of the psyche. Sorry for the interrupting noise. But this is kind of the like let's say the basic situation. Because otherwise, right? So otherwise, Jentsch wouldn't have done this study. I mean, it could also be that it turns out that he finds, or he comes to the conclusion in his study, that the uncanny hasn't anything to do, or hasn't any, like, let's say, any content that is worth studying in terms of psychology, that it's more perhaps like an epiphenomenon, or that it is something that is marginal. But it seems this isn't the case, and even if Jentsch would come to that conclusion, it could still be that, like, let's say, something marginal or something epiphenomenal could be of interest in terms of psychology. So something that is considered from another perspective marginal, that is what I wanted to say, could be considered it could be considered relevant for psychology, because, right, the psychology has a really specific object of study, which is the human subject, or as you want to put it, the psyche. I mean, there are quite important distinctions in that. So perhaps to say human subject, it's more from an external perspective to go about and approach the human subject as a kind of object. And to speak about the psyche, it has rather a different connotation, or a different kind of set of assumptions attached to it, I would say. So, but let's start from there. Freud is pleased that someone is investigating in that direction. Nevertheless, he will set himself apart from the position of Ernst Jentsch, at least in the way Freud reads Jentsch, or is positioning Jentsch. So I didn't read the paper by Jentsch yet, so I do not have any any founded or any arguable opinion on that reading of Jentsch by Freud, but we want to focus here on how Freud is reading Ernst Jentsch. What is his analysis of Jentsch's position? Because, as we will see, Freud, as kind of content he is with the study or that Jentsch has did the study, and that Freud can kind of connect to that study, he will set himself apart and will criticize the position of Jentsch. And I mean, this is kind of a common a common move by theoretician, I guess, that right, first of all, you are kind of happy that you can can reference somebody else's work or somebody else's position, so that you have a starting point and that you have an access to the subject matter, right? Rather than having to carve out yourself this access, because what it allows you to is to go about and to start from that position and to kind of set yourself apart from that position, perhaps, or criticize that position in a constructive and productive way in the best case, so that you kind of emphasize what are the good lines of argumentation in that position, and what are kind of the lacks, or what is missed, what is only attempted but not really successful conducted in its study. So okay, let's kind of summarize how Freud is reading Ernst Jentsch. So I guess one could summarize this position the following way. So with this subject matter, or the phenomenon of the uncanny, Freud already says here, there is kind of a great variety, or people greatly vary in their sensitivity to this quality of feeling. So there's a variety in how people kind of react to that kind of quality of feeling that is connected to the uncanny. Nevertheless, it seems that analytically one can kind of separate, or can kind of identify. Okay, one has to be kind of careful with identification, because right, the uncanny isn't like an object, but it's more like an analytical category at this moment, or in this way Freud is doing what he's doing. So let's say the uncanny is an analytic category, and to this subject matter or phenomenon of the uncanny, we can say that there is a certain quality of feeling connected. And now the question becomes how to, and this is kind of an irreducible trait, or something that is considered to be the case. Now that this is occurring, that this phenomenon is there, the uncanny in quotation marks. Now, and that people are suffering from this quality of feeling. And now the question becomes how to come up with an explanation. How do we explain this subject matter or phenomenon, this analytic category, in terms of psychology, medical psychology? And right, so what is the explanation given by Jentsch, at least in the reading Freud is giving Jentsch? Now, according to Freud, Jentsch's position is that this phenomenon of the uncanny and the connected quality of feeling is due to an intellectual uncertainty. So the idea is kind of that, now to a little bit over-exaggerated, that people go about their day-to-day life, and they conduct their everyday life, and they have certain kind of relevant structures and also socio-technological infrastructures, which and socio-technological socio-technologies like language, and kind of communication, interaction that give them kind of a hold in this conduct of their everyday life, and kind of that gives them kind of the architecture of their behavior. Now, and this gives people a hold, we could say, and gives them kind of certainty also in terms of intellectual capacities or intellectual grounding, so that they kind of can understand this or their environment in terms of these structures and infrastructures, and this is kind of what gives them their hold in everyday life. And we can see that by looking at how everyday life is going about. Now, and the idea is that there are certain situations where this kind of frame of reference and this kind of environing surrounding of structures and infrastructures is kind of shifting, or there's something like an event happening that is kind of disturbing or interrupting the everyday going about in people. And this is the moment where something like the uncanny as a phenomenon with its specific quality of feeling can occur in people. That this shift in the frame of reference, or this disturbance, you could almost say an anomaly, is kind of leading to an intellectual uncertainty. And really the cause of the uncanny is this intellectual uncertainty in people, so that they're kind of let's say their cognitive access and confidence in what is happening around them is interrupted for a moment, is disturbed for a moment, and this is the moment when the uncanny is breaking in, or is occurring as a phenomenon in them. Now, Freud will set apart from this, and we will see why he is a critique of that position. But what we can say for now is that it's pretty obvious that Freud will be suspicious of this position, because what it entails is, and now again a little bit over exaggerated, is that we are these autonomous subjects who go about their day-to-day life, and who find themselves in structures and infrastructures and kind of communication and interactions that give us a grounding and really make us the beings we are, like these autonomous, self-deciding human subjects that comes with a certain confidence that is also grounded in our cognitive and intellectual capacities. And Freud will be suspicious of this, and this is pretty obvious in all of his writing and work, right? With like the formula, the popular formula of Freud, well known, that we are not the housekeepers in our own home. So we will see how he is not. He's not kind of convinced by Jensch's explanation of the phenomenon and subject matter of the uncanny. So we will start with today with a couple of quotes. So still not. We are still not with the primary source, and but we hopefully will come there. But I think it's really helpful to start with these quotes. And the first quote is from a text written by Chen Min It's called Wechselspiel zwischen dem Imaginären, Fiktiven und Realen. So kind of the interplay between the imaginary, the fictitious and the real. And it's like an analysis of Kepler's dream of the moon from the perspective or the view, out of the view from a literary anthropology. Now, the first quote reads as follows. Seen in this light, literary fiction is a transitional figure between the imaginary and the real, for it is neither a quality of the real, nor can it be derived from it, nor is it something that is identical with the imaginary, but something that always connects to the real and the imaginary and can produce reciprocal effects of both. In this way, literary fiction creates an as-if world that, through signals of fiction, points readers to something imaginary that is also not identical to it, but can lead readers to irrealize themselves in order to turn the imaginary implied in the text into reality. In doing so, the imaginary is made tangible to readers as a kind of event which can further initiate a guided act of imagination on the part of readers. In this act, readers are confronted with a twofold boundary crossing, namely beyond the textual world and into the diffuse of the imaginary. In doing so, readers see it as necessary to cope with the eventful experience of the imaginary through an act of sense-making, that is, to transcend the real frames of reference and the fictional textual immanence, and to bring the event of the imaginary back to the familiar. Only from this act of sense-making can the sense of the fictional text emerge as a pragmatization of the imaginary, which enables the emergence of new systems of sense or realities. How the creation of new realities through literary fictions can look concretely will be exemplified by the following analysis of Kepler's dream of the moon. Now, end of the quote. Sorry for the wrong text at the end. Okay, so this is the first quote by Min. And just let us look. I have another quote from Min. No, it's not this. It's where is it? It's not this. Yeah, it's here. Okay, sorry for it was on the wrong slide, but yeah, it's a longer quote, but afterwards I will say why I think it's or I will explain why I think it's helpful to enter into the conversation or into the session with these quotes. Now, okay, so quote from Min, page 45. Therefore, this article attempts to apply Wolfgang Iser's literary anthropology to the analysis of the dream in order to discover how the imaginary, the fictive, and the real interact concretely in this text so that a new reality can emanate. In the following, the main points of this theory will first be outlined in order to better understand the argumentation of the following textual analysis. According to Iser, every literary text is an author's world assignment against a certain historical backdrop. It is fictitious because it does not exist as a literary complex in its real environment to which it refers. But this does not mean that a literary fiction is made up out of thin air, for it is a consequence of the transgressive act of fabrication. It results from an interplay of the intentional, fictive, arbitrary, imaginary, and given real, whereby various real elements are selected, combined, supplemented, and bracketed from their textual environment. In this way, a thoroughly recognizable reality returns in the fictional text, which is now, however, under the sign of faking. In the process, a text internal world has come into being that is not real, but for the sake of a certain purpose is to be imagined as if it were. For a fictional text is at the same time interspersed with such signals that make it recognizable to the readers as fictional. But if literature exposes its very fictionality, how can it still produce reality? To answer this, we must first look back at a premise of Wieser's literary anthropology. The fictive and the imaginary are not merely peculiar to literature, nor do they form an opposition to reality. Rather, they indicate man's fundamental urge to represent his plasticity. The historical variety of literary fiction then serves as a special mirror to this urge, allowing people as readers to experience and understand how the visualization of this plasticity can constantly reformulate his real images of himself or herself and the world. Okay, so now why do I think that these quotes are really helpful for the discussion, or before we go into the primary source of Freud's text? So now what is mentioned here is the, like, let's say, a trifold structure, or a trifold kind of constellation between the imaginary, the fictitious, and the real. And people who are familiar with Jacques Lacan will kind of see the connection. Lacan was speaking of a tripart structure, a topology, like the famous Borromini knot between the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. Now, for Lacan, who's a reader of Freud, but he's greatly interpreting Freud in terms of structuralism, so he's kind of getting rid, you could say, of the contents in some sense, and is merely in quotation marks studying or is especially studying the structures. So the kind of the content becomes attractors or moments in terms of a structural functional dynamic constellation. And now for Lacan, the imaginary is in a first approximation, it is heavily reliant on the body image. So as you might know, for Lacan, there is he's kind of arguing and conceptually unfolding and also trying to give evidence for what he calls the mirror stage, where a child is for the first time recognizing herself or himself in the mirror, and the kind of the crux or the neuralgic moment is when the child is like turning around and is looking to the parents, to the people in the room, and as they are cherishing and applauding towards the child. This is the moment when the child forms the growing human subject, or the human subject that is in becoming, kind of forms an image of the body, which is a whole, a unity, which wasn't there before. So it's you could say it's kind of a paradigmatic moment in that sense, that paradigma, originally coming from the Greek, means to indicate or show something, or to show something or to indicate something next to something else, or at once while showing something else. And in that sense, it's a paradigmatic moment, because the child is kind of seeing a body which is before this psychological developmental stage is kind of a not a whole, but it's just consisting of parts which are separate parts. And what is now shown at once through the applauding and cheering of the other people is that this merely separated by parts corporal cut and disconnected disconnected it's not a body, but it's like it's a structure of entities, is a whole body. And this is kind of set into an image, or it's kind of forming an image in terms of the psychological development. And an image is always something which is right, which has a frame. It's kind of a unity. It's kind of a something which is whole in a sense. Now, okay, and this is the first approximation to the imaginary. It's connected to the body image, to a unity, also to an image of the something whole and something connected, something that belongs together and that is kind of working and functioning together. And and now the symbolic for Lacan. The symbolic is not mentioned here, but in the quote from Min, but I just give a first approximation. The symbolic, you can kind of get a first access, an approximative access to it. What this concept kind of entails is it's kind of it's not only texts and written rules and laws, but all the everything that settles and that kind of is the that settles the socio-organizational environment, the socio-pragmatic context in which people move and in which they organize themselves to communities, to groups. So all this is entailed in terms of the symbolic. And the symbolic, obviously by the name, has to do with symbols. And one way to analytically distinguish the imaginary and the symbolic, and I think that there is quite some evidence in that, is that in terms of the symbolic, we can apply and can make use of the operation that is called negation. So we can negate in a really simple sense. So I can say, right, I don't want to go to the meeting today. So I can negate that, and I can communicate this message entailing this negation to other people. So I can make myself understandable, and I can also if I say that even to myself, it's a decision that I made, at least. One would normally say that. So I made this decision, and now I can communicate it to other people. Now, in terms of the imaginary, what is kind of peculiar to it is that negation, the operation of negation, isn't working or functioning. So you can experience that by an example. So when I tell you to not to think for the next 2 minutes towards or onto like a pink elephant. So do not imagine and do not think of a pink elephant, right? Most certainly what is happening is that in the next 2 minutes, something like a pink elephant is showing up before your inner eyes, or you're kind of at least giving a thought to that, in terms of something that you picture. And this is what I mean, that there is an analytic distinction between the symbolic and the imaginary. And this has to do with the operation of negating, or of negation. Now, the real is the third register, and the real, for Lacan, I mean, it depends on the stages of his work, but at one point it is the impossible. It is that which kind of cannot be actualized, pretty much akin to Heidegger. So Lacan is really close reader of Heidegger, but I guess a trait that is not so much changing in terms of how Lacan is then refining and reworking this Borromedean knot between the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real, is that the real is what cannot be symbolized on the one side, and what cannot be kind of set into an image in terms of the imaginary. So it cannot be symbolized, and we cannot picture it. We cannot bring it into a frame, or we cannot bring it into a whole. It is rather something akin to, or something, in a sense of a broken in itself figure. So it will never come into, it cannot come constitutively, it cannot come into a figuration, into a full figuration. That is not possible, and it cannot be symbolized. We cannot symbolize it, and this is kind of an approximation. So it's nothing behind the symbolic or the imaginary, or something outside. But these are all moments that are, in terms of the topological. The topological nexus, they are all interlinked, and you don't represent it to yourself as kind of a mechanistic interlinkage, but a topology is a continuous figure that it's and topology is you can look that up, right? It's in terms of math. It's a way of doing the operation of fully bring fully in movement forms. So nothing will nothing besides relations will stay the same during topological shifts and changes of figurations. So topology is describing relations between kind of moments in geometrical figures. I mean, this is kind of a kind of an too short explanation, I guess, but it's kind of looking at shifts in geometrical figures, and it's looking at or describing the relations between moments or points in a mathematical sense in terms of these geometrical figures, and describing these relations while the forms are totally shifting. So nothing of the form is staying the same, and there are certain figures that come out of these topological operations, like the Borromedean knot, which is just a relational descriptions of a specific topological figure that is mathematically describable. Okay, now, so this was a short discourse, not a discourse, but a short first approximation of Lacan's three registers. Now, with Min, he is mentioning the imaginary and the real, and we now have some kind of understanding, at least from a Lacanian perspective, what the imaginary and the real may be from a structural reading of psychoanalysis. Now, what Min is greatly pointing out here is what the role of the fictitious maybe and of fiction. And why I'm mentioning this all is that, right, Freud is looking into the text by E.T.R. Hoffmann, which is The Sandman, in terms of this essay, The Uncanny. Now, and you may ask yourself perhaps, why is he doing that, and why can he do that? Why is he able to do that? How is this by any means sound? And I mean, one can criticize that, of course, right? So, but how is this sound? And I guess some people in the times of Ernst Jentsch may also criticize Jentsch for, and then of course Freud, for looking in such themes or subject matters and phenomenon like the uncanny, right? Because it's more associated for people with literary or literature analysis. So even with fiction, right? So how can this be like a serious scientific or like analytic research subject? Now, when we look back to the first quote, right? Seen in this light, literary fiction is a transitional figure between the imaginary and the real. And I think this is this really, clothes in words what Freud in a way is after with his text, that literary fiction has this specific role as a you could almost say at a boundary, and at a boundary, not position, but at a boundary, at a boundary, let's leave it like that, at a boundary between the imaginary and the real. And what literary fiction and fiction in general seems to be able to do is to bridge. I mean, it's always like a really metaphorical word, but to mediate and to bring together while holding apart the imaginary and the real. So they are, and this is why I mentioned Lacan. They are different registers, so they are not reducible to each other, the real and the imaginary. Nevertheless, there can be, it seems, there can be certain kinds of, channels, or, I mean, this is then also a reification that we're now talking about channels, like if it's an object, but there can be, there can be certain situations of transference and of events of taking place where the imaginary and the real are they're not connected, but they are and they are not communicating, but they are both at once they're both at once addressed or active in that sense. So you see, I have some problems to make the point here, but I think this will really help us, because for Freud, this is the same with dream analysis. One can ask now, how can he by any means do that? How is that like a sound approach to study and analyze dreams? But we will see that in dreams, Freud is kind of also analyzing something akin to what he sees or what he finds with literary fiction, that during dreaming, during the night during sleeping, right? The this disconnection between the imaginary and the symbolic, especially, like, right, we talked about the distinction that with or in terms of the symbolic we can operate with negation, but in terms of the imaginary we cannot do that. But in terms of dreaming, there is a breakthrough, you could almost say. I mean, this is the word what I was lacking before. There's a breakthrough and kind of a working together of the symbolic and the imaginary. So, and I think the same is a important trait in terms of literary fiction or fiction in general. That there's a breakthrough and a transference situation between now not the symbolic and the imaginary, but between the imaginary and the real. And when we read fiction, so when we immerse ourselves in these as-if worlds, and right, how we are doing that, we read symbols, we gather symbols and words to sentences to whole paragraphs, and but something else is going on, right? So we kind of immerse ourselves in a fictional world, an as-if world, and even if we know that it's fiction, there can nevertheless occur these moments of uncanniness. And I think this is what really interests Freud. Now, how is that possible? How is there a genuine phenomenon insisting, and it is there for real, right? How can that be possible in terms of a fictional or fictional context? And I think this is only, or the kind of, it's only possible, the constitutive condition for that, if you want to put it like this, is that literary fiction holds this transitional figure, or this transitional role, and is working in terms of boundary, and it's especially working in terms of the side of exception, you could say. So what I mean by that is that it can kind of it can transgress kind of the imaginary and touch something, touch something in quotation marks of the real, but in terms of fiction. And I think this is kind of the trait that Freud is interested in. Now, I have some other quote, which is also really helpful, I hope. So it's from Gerd Hoffmann. Raumsituation erzählte Wirklichkeit. Poetologische und historische Studien zum englischen und amerikanischen Roman. So space, situation, and told actuality. You could I don't know a better translation at this moment. So it's Erzählung. It's like it telling, and narrative actualities or narrative realities. So Wirklichkeit in German is normally translated with actuality. So in German there is a distinction between Wirklichkeit, something that is actual, that kind of temporalizes effects, and reality, which which bears this term real in it, but there's always a great distinction to be made between the everyday use of reality and, for example, what Min or then Lacan calls the real. Now, okay, but now the quote. Thus, the design of the room does not happen arbitrarily. its atmosphere rises in its totality and in its unique composition that cannot be arbitrarily exchanged. Criteria such as distance or directions do not devote the intonated, voiced, in tune spaced. So these are my translation or my attempts of translations of the German term gestimmter Raum. So gestimmt, die Stimme is German the voice, and Stimmung is, for example, in the Heideggerian notion of Stimmung is sometimes translated as attunement or as mood, but I think mood is it's not so much working as a translation, and even attunement has its problems. And so I try to translate it with intonated, voiced, and tune space to give some different a spectrum of notions. So okay, on the level of the intonated space, so gestimmter Raum, the binary depth relation of the text can be analyzed, which ask for a center or background, for an above and below, or for an abundance of objects, as well as connections or classifications of the visual details. The relationship between subject and object, passivity, activity, changes in the perception of space. Also plays a role at this level. Perspectives of the experiencer or describer, as well as a metaphorical or yet exactly descriptive style of language, are also of interest here. In addition, it should be mentioned with Elisabeth Strücker that intonated space lacks intentionality and is free of directional differences and measurements. Its, quote, its distances are other than measurable. So really Heideggerian, going back to the work of Martin Heidegger here in terms of his analysis of the spatiality of Dasein. Space is determined by expression and the atmospheric. Here, it is not of interest whether things are serviceable or fit for space is not directed towards a goal. So why I choose this quote is, and I just see I might reference it incorrectly, so it's from Nigischer Konstruktion von Wirklichkeit, page 25. So why I'm citing this is that now with this notion of attuned space or intonated space, gestimmter Raum, so there is something peculiar to it in that Elisabeth Ströker kind of puts emphasis here that this kind of spatiality is lacking intentionality. And what does it mean? Intentionality in terms of coming from the philosophical studies and work of Brentano, and then greatly emphasized from Husserl. Intentionality, right, is said to be an kind of an essential trait of consciousness. That consciousness is always consciousness of something, so it always has an object that it is directed towards, and that it that it recognizes in terms of recognition, for example, or that it wills in terms of the will, and so on. Now, and the peculiarity of this kind of spatiality that is kind of described here is that it lacks this kind of intentionality. And I think this is also really something to keep in mind when it comes to the subject matter and the phenomenon of the uncanny. While we bear in mind that this series is about anxiety, and anxiety is defined by, for example, kind of, it's not so much a definition, but it's an it's analyzed by Heidegger, for example, but then also von Lacan, and differentiated, but also from Kierkegaard, that it is different than dread, in that anxiety, this kind of angst, in terms of an emphatic notion of anxiety, lacks an object in comparison to dread. So we can fear, for example, and we can be dreadful of a lion. We would be fearful of an object, but in terms of this emphatic notion of anxiety and what this phenomenon and subject matter entails, is that or the peculiarity of this angst is that it's objectless. And with it, and I think there this quote helps in terms of the attuned or intonated or voice space, is that with it goes a certain notion of spatiality, where there is also not so much measurable distances, what is kind of prevalent, or what is being the realm of this kind of spatiality, or being the essential trait of this kind of spatiality, but rather something else is qualitatively relevant in terms of this spatiality. And I think this will also be relevant when we talk to or when we come to the Uncanny by Sigmund Freud. But you could all or I can point to that, right? When we read fictional literature or fictional literature, is right. There's a certain kind of spatiality to it, right? We immerse ourselves, so we dive into these as if worlds, and it's almost that all our surrounding and environment, comparably to going into a movie and stepping out of the cinema, right? All your environment can be drenched into this, now I used the notion mood, that was kind of witnessed or kind of suffered in the cinematic event, in the kinematographic cineography. Okay, so let's leave it like that. Now, I have again two other quotes, and then we will go to the primary sources. Now, this quote comes from Becker originally, or some parts of the quote, and it's by Thomas Bedürftig from the text Infinitesimalien, Grenzwerte und zurück. So it's about infinitesimal and about certain boundary. Now I'm missing the word. About how do you say? Perhaps I'm coming back to it, but let's read the quote. So Leibniz himself spoke of fictions, quantitates fictitae. The meaning of the Latin fictio is wide. It ranges from imagination and mental form to fantasy and nonsense. Today, one likes to interpret fiction negatively, setting aside the infinitesimal as a historical aberration. In this negative sense of fiction as inventions of unreal, nonsensical, or event false entities, one must not and cannot speak of Leibniz. Leibniz thought thus, and now quote, inside the quote, one can thus use the infinite and the infinitely small lines, even if one does not admit them in metaphysical strictness and as real things, nevertheless unobjectionably as ideal terms by which the calculation is abbreviated, similarly to the imaginary roots in the ordinary analysis. No, sorry for the probably bad translation, but I just put it in some translation software.